Hello and welcome everybody to our discussion about the book. And this is a volume that is coming out next year, and the title is Industry 4.0 to Industry 5.0, Explorations in the Transition from a Techno-economic to a Socio-technical Future. This will be an open access book, and we're hoping to get it out by spring 2024. So this book is an open access, and it's exploring the transitions and the ecological, and this includes the resilient transitions for human-centric focus. So I'd like to introduce my co-editors, Gary Metcalf, David Ng, and we have a couple of our chapter authors here, Manuel Morales and Morteza Gobalgo. So I'd like to pass it over to Gary at this point, and we can start the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Susu. So Manuel and Morteza, being lead people on the research team that founded this work, could you talk a little bit about what that research project was like, just as a foundation for the work that's been done?
Yeah, I can maybe start, and then you, Morteza, can complete. First of all, I think that it's I will start by talking about this journey that started in the University of Kaunas Technological University, where it was a chair on Industry 4.0 transition, specifically on the impact on management and economics. So this was this is a project of 4 years project that was granted with the European Union funding. And first of all, talking about how we get to think about the background needed in order to achieve this final outcome, which is now the book. We start by identifying what are the research strategy areas. So this was a work that we made collectively among the different members of the team, of the close team, after 1 year and a half of being in the research field, in the ground. So we came to identify what we called a matrix of Industry 4.0 impact on management and economics. And this matrix, it's composed by 3 different scopes, talking about the levels of research analysis, the micro analysis, one meso analysis, and one more macro, about macro issues. And also we take some insights from sustainability disciplines or sustainability research, where we bring 3 of different areas of analysis. We get into the economic pillar, the environmental, and also the social pillar. So using these 3 rows and columns, we identify 9 different, we can say, clusters. Those clusters were very different in required skills and competences, but we find that this systemic approach was very intuitive and also was helping us to have productive discussions about the transitions that were taking place from the Industry 5.0 to the new requirements that the society was experiencing on Industry 5.0. Just as an example, some of these 9 clusters, so you can have an idea of what we're talking about, is, for example, we define as areas corporate digitalization. We also identify green business operations, human-centric issues, which are also part of this of the book. Value chain, talking about the resilience and also the sustainability of those value chains when the issues of circularity are also involved. We get into cleaner industries, a bit more into technical issues. Still talking about this social part, we get into employment and the empowerment of human resources, and also the part of the well-being and the ethics on the social part. And we can end with the industry innovation and growth and the responsible production and consumption. So these were the 9 areas that were identified during this project. Of course, some of them were more explored according to the profile of the researchers that were involved in this project, in this journey. But at the end, I think that this journey set the grounds in order to be able to have fruitful discussions about the future and what we expect as Industry 5.0 to be. So this is part of the experiences that we cross in order to develop this current state of the book.
Great, good, thank you, Manuel. So Morteza, as you pick up your side of it, could you give us a little understanding about what Industry 4.0 actually represents, just in case people aren't familiar?
Of course. Hopefully I am audible. Industry 4.0 was first introduced as a German concept that represented a kind of like a national framework for boosting manufacturing sector capabilities in using advanced technologies so that Germany's manufacturing sector can become more competitive. So that was the origin of this Industry 4.0 concept. Later on, it became like some sort of argument happened around this concept because it became quite popular and some sort of hype was created around this topic, especially within academia. And some argued that, this is just a hype, but, as the technologies advanced and became more commercialized and more companies started using them, almost everybody agreed that Industry 4.0 is a real concept within the manufacturing environment, and it is not limited to Germany. Actually, a lot of countries around the world that they accepted this term, or they kind of invented like alternate terms for them, from Industrial Internet to China 2025 or others. And later on, we observed that actually there are like other industries that are kind of ahead as compared to manufacturing industry when it came to using advanced technologies under the umbrella of Industry 4.0, especially such as like tourism or like financial sector and so on and so forth. So after a while, it became a kind of agreement that Industry 4.0 represents the digital transformation of the value networks, and like all members or like stakeholders involved, whether we're talking about individual companies like manufacturers or distributors or like service providers, or even whether we're talking about governments or like social agencies in some sense. So recently, it has been quite clear that Industry 4.0 is a reality. Okay, like it doesn't matter if we want to accept this term or not. We are experiencing, or we have been experiencing, a kind of industrial revolution pushed by the emergence of new technologies during the past decade. And if you ask me about like what are the key technologies, I can list like 20 kind of modern technologies shaping this Industry 4.0 phenomenon. But I would say that like IoT has been the cornerstone and the main pillar of this revolution, in my opinion.
Good. And what really was the point of needing to study this from a research standpoint?
Doing this research on Industry 4.0, you mean, right?
Well,
Yeah.
and it's really the incentive for this research project. I mean, the European Commission funded this, if I understand.
Yeah.
And so there must have been some need they felt for actually studying what was happening.
Yeah, I guess the main reason was like this project was initially started in 2019. At that time, the Industry 4.0 term wasn't quite well understood and widely agreed upon. So that was one of the reasons why European Commission like had several research projects funded, just to like have a better understanding of like this framework, its role in shaping the future of European industry in some sense. And another reason was that like it appeared that the European Commission wanted a kind of more equal distribution of like advancement or knowledge in terms of Industry 4.0 across Europe. So it was a good idea, I guess, for them to fund a project being launched by like a Baltic state, I would say.
Great, thank you.
But just if I want to finish this, like, yeah, this is a very long topic, all right? And it like 1 decade or 10 years or like 5 years is nothing. I mean, when we put the like scientific perspective, but during the past 4 or 5 years, this topic has undergone a lot of change, significant change.
Yeah.
Good.
If I can add a bit on what just was Morteza said, I think that also European Commission identify Industry 4.0 as one of their priorities in the political agenda. And they identify also that they were missing research capacity. I mean, in Europe, it was not strong enough because the concept was a bit vague. I mean, it's still vague at this point, but it was even more before. And the idea, as it was previously mentioned, it's this kind of funding coming from the European Commission. It's a European research advancement. So the idea here is to bring international or European experts in different competences, or with different competences and skills related to Industry 4.0 together, and to create the conditions required in order to have a deeper reflection on the characteristics, on the definition, and also in the future avenues of research regarding Industry 4.0.
Good, thanks, Manuel. So Susu, let's turn now to the book. So you've got it was a 5-year funded research project, is that correct?
4 years.
4 years. 4 years of research that then you needed to condense some amount of learning and outcomes into a book. Tell us about how that worked.
Well, yes. How did that work exactly? The book project did start. I was actually brought in at the transition point, which was early last year, and so this book was. We started the process for this as the research was finalizing. We had to pick it up and then translate this into a book, and so this all started in 2022. And we all know what happened at the end of 2022. We had that wonderful generative AI technology appear on the market and everywhere. And so this kind of put the cat amongst the pigeons. It's kind of sort of made it very difficult to understand how to, continue to develop the narrative that we were putting together. So this actually impacted the narrative and the scope of the book quite radically, because at the beginning of this year, we then had to realize that the impact was such that it was actually impacting the topic of transition from Industry 4 to 5. And what does Industry 5.0 really mean? And what does this impact mean? The technological advancement and impact on the transition, and what exactly is Industry 5.0? So because of this, the scope really had to be quite tight. And most people know that if they ever produce the book, 12 months is usually what you need. even Spring and Nature, Japan agreed with us. So we had this lovely experiment and also a successful outcome, I'm happy to say, that we had to do a rapid prototyping of writing and publishing and producing a technical book. And so what I introduced was the development of the process of the discussion, so iterative discussions like a design approach, and sort of had 2 major symposiums, and we put those people together. You and others all came, as many people together face to face, which was a very, very informative and very critical 4 to 5 days that we had in Kaunas University, in KTU in Kaunas in March this year, where we got together and actually did a deep dive. And we asked some fundamental critical questions. As Manuel said, some of those questions kept pointing to the human-centric question. And what does actual human-centric mean? And as both Morteza and Manuel have pointed out, there's quite a range of research interest, and there's quite a lot of perspectives involved. So how to scope those perspectives and pull them together? And so the critical aspect of human-centric question, which ended up being kind of a red thread throughout the book, was something that we focused on, because regarding different types of perspectives, this human-centric question took on different elements of it. So with the rapid prototyping approach, lots and lots of rounds of iterative discussion, and most of us are all around the world, so none of us actually sat in the same room. So this was quite interesting, because also in the book, as Manuel just said, we also, whilst it may be European core, we also had reflections from other people from around the world, authors, and in input. So this had to be reflected and balanced as a narrative. And so this became a really sharp and tight focus around the transition. It's the recording of the transition of a short space of time, which, why is that important? Because of the AI introduction, so, and the enormous impact it had. So we feel that we've captured a very sort of interesting historical moment in a transition in a book that will be almost out of date before it's published, but because we have that historical perspective, it can capture for you what was going on the ground. And so also asking and reflecting on the questions that were being asked at the time. So these are kind of really important aspects, I think, that we use to reflect the multiple different perspectives of each chapter and the overall narrative of the book and pulling it together. So I hope I didn't miss anything out. So yeah.
Yeah, we'll catch it. Thank
you.
So let's step over to the idea that this was a European funded research project, and that was the foundation. But the topics we're talking about are certainly not limited to Europe in any way, and I think we've already touched on it. So David, I'm curious about your perspective, having spent 28 years at IBM, helping companies implement technologies. How do you see both some of the history and the more recent transitions?
So coming to the question of Industry 4.0 and 5.0, there are multiple 4.0s and 5.0s out there. And so since I actually don't live in the EU, I'm familiar with the Industry 5.0 initiative, but I bring that perspective of what do you mean by 4.0 or 5.0? So coming from a software background, there's this differentiation between what I would call an incremental adaptation and a generational shift. And a generational shift is really an industrial revolution. And people don't really think about industrial revolution in the bigger sense. There's been multiple approaches. There's a techno-economic paradigm that Carlotta Perez brings. There's the science and technology basic plan that Japan has. The EU has Industry 4.0 and 5.0. Then the World Economic Forum brought up this idea of the fourth industrial revolution. So the question that we could be asking ourselves is this really a revolution or just an evolution?
Good, thank you. So that really brings us now to the next set of questions. You've got a research project. We've spent time trying to condense a part of that into this book, but also the breadth of other perspectives that additional authors have brought in some of the other chapters. So what exactly is Industry 5.0?
That's an interesting question. That brings me to my thoughts about looking at the chapter with Manuel and Morteza, and discussing where they discuss the these different points about, different perspectives around what we might think of Industry 5.0, and also the physical aspect of trying to capture this moving target as you're trying to pull the book narrative together. And why is it? I'd answer that with maybe another question. Why did the AI aspect have such an impact on Industry 5.0 while we're looking at it in live, or while it's in transition? And this is because it kept changing and morphing. Like, for example, Manuel or Morteza can speak to this. Do we imagine that Industry 5.0 is much more of a policy patch, for example? Because of the movement and the speed at which AI was developing, does this mean that Industry 5.0 is actually changing its nature right before our eyes, and therefore very hard to define? We then, during our discussions, I recall our two symposiums that we had to rapid prototype this, it seemed that the human-centric element and the resilience of transition were something that you could grasp on a sort of a higher level. But asking to define exactly what Industry 5.0 is at this point, as opposed to last year, you could already see quite a lot of differences. So perhaps Morteza might want to talk to that a little bit more, since you wrote about it.
Yeah, of course. I would say that we should wait and see what's going to happen. That's my answer. Because this concept, I mean, speaking from the perspective of academia, has changed quite a lot. So I cannot make any judgment right now. So the point is, like, if we go back to 2018 or something like that, when, some initial ideas about Industry 5.0 was created within the academia, some scholars proposed that Industry 5.0 would be the fifth industrial revolution, pushed by the advancement of some futuristic technologies such as living smart materials, or like cognitive technologies, general AI, or like adaptive robots, and so on and so forth. So it was quite futuristic and idealistic, and nobody really agreed, or cared about this perspective, to be honest, because everybody was dealing with Industry 4.0 hype. Then European Commission in like 2021, 2022, they took a very firm stance against Industry 5.0, and they said that, okay, Industry 4.0 has failed us in some aspects, especially about like social issues and values. And we believe that Industry 5.0 is not an industrial revolution. It's just a policy framework. It's a governance framework that is going to be attached to Industry 4.0. So this way we can regulate the pace of digital transformation within Europe. So if you consider this perspective, Industry 5.0 is a confusing term, and it just refers to a policy framework, something like that, right? Then it caused a lot of issues, and scholars started to argue about that, whether this one or that one is correct and whatnot. And all of a sudden, general AI came and changed everything, and everybody panicked as a result of like the sheer impact of that technology. And now everybody is second guessing. Wait a minute, maybe it could be like a massive shift in the industrial paradigm, and maybe we can call it Industry 5.0. Maybe it's not quite related to Industry 4.0, because as I said, like Industry 4.0 has been mostly about IoT and other emerging technologies, but it seems that now it's AI term and general AI. So this is quite confusing to have a definitive answer for that.
I'd like
David?
I'd like to also add to that something that Gary Metcalf wrote in what he was looking at, which was just to add to your points, Morteza, that as you said, it's quite confusing. And is Industry 5.0 actually something, or is it something else? Or is it running parallel? And so that's a very interesting outcome and of something that we've done with the work with the book. So perhaps it's like a very good, interesting question that, it might not be an Industry 5.0, it might be something running parallel, and we're actually grappling with, as you said, let's wait and see. So I would like to actually ask Gary because he brought up that topic in his work. Would you like to sort of say something about that, Gary?
Sure. So let's talk just a little bit about kind of the history and how, this is not all entirely new, right? We call this Industry 1.0 through 5.0, referencing the Industrial Revolution. So the idea is, following Klaus Schwab and the fourth Industrial Revolution concept, which I think fed into this somewhat. There's this idea that from the very first Industrial Revolution, steam engines came along, the automation of things like looms for weaving were introduced, which replaced manual labor. And so this idea of technology being moved into the workplace has been evolving since the mid 1700s. Now, the first evolutions, took a long time. Now, it was 200 years from what we consider the first industrial revolution until we started implementing electricity in factories, and then we got computerization. But at each point along the way, there have been some really serious questions about the relationship between humans in the workplace and the machines, and how those either work together or threaten each other, or how they become just the next way of understanding and working. So David, you had some thoughts about this.
Yes. So from a systems perspective, there's a socio-technical view and there's a socio-ecological view. The socio-technical view is inside the organization and how people would change work. Now, for me, if I look at, I'm not going to use the word Industry 4.0 because it had a specific meaning. I'm going to call it Era 4.0. There was a shift from the previous ones, previous industrial revolutions, and Era 4.0 you could call as information age. And with the information age, you could say that, okay, so Era 4.0 started with the personal computer, then Era 4.1 was the internet, 4.2 is when smartphones came in. And so I see generative AI as maybe Era 4.3. At the same time, there's a lot of things happening in the socio-ecological sphere. We have climate change. Industry 5.0 actually speaks to climate change. It speaks to social justice. That, to me, is a revolution. Now, the question is, can you push a revolution? That's a big challenge.
That's a huge question.
So Manuel, maybe you want to feel a bit. So there is this concept that Industry 5 is just a policy patch. And then all the way to the extension that David brought up, Industry 5 is supposed to be solving climate change. It's supposed to affect the strategic development goals that the UN set out for climate policy. And somewhere in between is what people are actually trying to do. So your thoughts about what this actually is.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of very interesting keywords in what we were just discussing. Starting for this, I mean, as we agree now, I mean, industry, it's not a mainstream worldwide concept. I think that it is something that it's happening and an ongoing process, and it is getting many different names. But the factual thing, I think, is that we identify that it has limitations. This has some gaps, specifically because it came to a point where it was more kind of technological push, I mean, tech pushing into the changes, and at a certain point, some of the actors, public actors, but also civil society, wanted to have some centralized decisions to get more empowerment on the system, and this was one of the real let's say policy arguments when we decide as I mean, talking about the European Commission concept, let's give some opportunity into this Industry 5.0 to see if it has this human centricity that could help as a possible transition option to address more complex issues. I mean, and when we are talking about complex issues, it's climate change, it's this social justice, social equity, and I think it's a bit early to know if this has if it will be successful or not. But the point here is that I agree with David when saying that if it's a revolution, it's possible to be pushed, to be voluntarily designed or pre-designed in order to be initiated as in this way. But I think really that the concept, the previous concept as it was known, just following the market signals built by the technology, is what it was at the long term. It was not really sustainable, so needed to find some other options.
Okay, so we brought this together at a point the last week of March of 2023 to try to basically set a stake in the ground, right? This has been going on. We're talking about a long arc of change in industrial revolutions, as they've been called. And yet the recent changes are moving so quickly. There was no way to say that we could capture all the information in real time in order to, say that we have anything definitive. So we agreed that we would try to capture the most essential concepts and set then a foundation that we could use to continue to learn as we watch these technologies evolve really quickly. I mean, I don't remember where generative AI was in the discussion, even in March of 2023, just a few months ago. What would you say are the most important things we've learned about these technologies, including now artificial intelligence, generative AI, and even the threat or promise of more general artificial intelligence? What do we learn? What have we learned that other people should know?
I would say that we'll learn how unprepared we are in order to to host all that amount of technological changes. So this is for me the learning point. So we need to invest on that, because there is a big gap, a society. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't have even the right tools to measure in a social perspective the impacts on the dynamics of the society as a system. So yeah,
I would say it's a really big disruptive, impact on society, as Manuel said. And it definitely caught everybody on the back foot, for sure. Educational institutions all over are grappling and still grappling. We had big discussions, if you recall, in our symposium in March and again in October, I think, but mostly in March, that what is it that you're actually capturing? If you're using ChatGPT, for example, how to implement it, how to handle it, what's the provenance of that information? How trustworthy is it? How reliable is it? How to use it, impact? It's not even got traditional foundations in research that we're used to. So it is a disruption, and rather a big one. And we really don't know how to handle it. Or we were in literally right now in transition 2023 in transition, knowing how to implement and handle that. So I don't think it's to mirror, to sort of say what Morteza said. Yeah, let's see. We're not sure. We don't know. But we can record definitely how it's impacting us. We can definitely record the different perspectives. I think this is extremely important because it gives you some sort of understanding of provenance, historical aspect, even if it's short term, and you can start relating it and looking at it. So documentation in the traditional sense. How you choose to do that, perhaps a book is quite difficult instrument to actually be doing something like this. A book is quite slow in comparison to what's needed. So perhaps we will have to rethink even how we record and document and describe and communicate this information and these sort of outcomes and discussions. We'll have to think of different ways.
Thank you. David, learnings?
I think that when people talk in terms of Industry 4.0 and 5.0 as different things, we should keep in mind that there could be things happening simultaneously. So when in the chapter I was writing, I decided, well, if we're going to talk about all these Industry 4 to 5 shifts, maybe we should go back and what's Industry 0.0? And the way I approached that was, okay, before the Industrial Revolution, what was the big shift that happened before that? And I started looking into Christopher Columbus discovering the New World. That brought a lot of change. Things like banks came in and finances and trade around the world and all those sorts of things changed. And so that was a revolution. But then you think about, well, Columbus all the way to steam engines. That's a big shift. But through all this, if you even look at the Industrial Revolution, Industry 1.0, not everyone was impacted equally by that. So I think there's an interesting question about policy versus the ability of people to absorb things. And maybe it's because politically people like to focus, politicians maybe like to bring up one issue. So we have generative AI happening. We also have climate change happening at the same time. One of my concerns is, can people actually do two things at once? Can we actually focus on it? Because since I work in technology, I actually see generative AI as a natural evolution of the industrial age, sorry, of the information age. Because in the information age, the long arc has been about data and the amount of data that's collected in the world. And the data is going to continue to be collected in the world. But the question could be, does that make a difference to a green economy or a circular economy? Do we use that data? And so it's not like the 4.0 era has gone away. It may be still there, just as the agricultural revolution is with the industrial revolution at the same time. We have people living in different eras at the same time.
Yeah. And just to use that argument and turn it on its side a little bit, David, I think it was maybe Klaus Schwab's book that he and certainly others have talked about the fact that this is not an all equal transition. There are huge populations, huge parts of the humans that live in the world today that are not living in Industry 4.0, much less 5. They may be in Industry 2. You know, people that don't necessarily have reliable access to electricity on a regular basis certainly are not really worried about their computers running. You know, their jobs are not threatened by automation in a way. They're just looking for food. So, you know, how you decide sort of which impact has happened to which parts of the human population and how do we project those forward is just another part of a very big discussion. So, Morteza, your thoughts about what we've learned?
These have been quite beautiful points. One of the issues with Industry 4.0 has been the fact that it has been a technology-driven phenomenon, and social actors, they have not been a part of its development in some sense, and it is a kind of like a widely acknowledged fact. All right. So the problem was that the technology decided what's going to happen to the work environment, to the employment market, to the universities, and to the industrial ecosystem in general. So it was an issue, maybe, as you said, mostly about advanced economies, right? But it was a quite serious issue. So this is why the idea of Industry 5.0 was proposed, at least from the perspective of the European Commission, so that we should regulate that, and social actors should be an active part of this governance system or measurement system or monitoring system, whatever we're going to call it. But the problem is that if Industry 5.0 is going to be presented by novel technologies such as generative AI or the likes of it, so the point that David mentioned is going to become a problem again, right? It is being pushed by technologies, and social actors or civil society in general is not a part of this system. Okay, so again, the technology will decide what is going to happen to the human beings. And that is a big problem, at least for the advanced economies.
Yeah. So we've got a lot of recent talk about concerns, about dangers and threats. Mostly it's been around, artificial intelligence in varying ways. But, again, as we've talked about, historically, it's been about technologies and the human relationship to those, how we understand them, how we embrace or work against them, how they impact us, depending on where we are in society, in jobs and professions. So being people who work in and have studied technologies in a lot of different ways, what should we most fear about them at this point? How founded are the fears that technology is going to somehow be really negative for humans?
If I can, because I want to react, and it's linked to your question with what David just said, talking about this challenge of climate change. If we can have double agenda and in this complexity handle two big issues like those two, and we have just experienced one example now with the COP29 in Arabia Saudita, and this is, I think, one example, because now we have some tools like AI tools that could work in our favor. I mean, in a lot of different ways. But the point is that some values are undermined by interest, political, global, geographical interest. And unless this makes some shift, even when some small island states are in danger now, this will not change. This will not change the geopolitical position of this kind of agreements needed in order to make things change. So I think this is one of the big threats, that the values that are needed in order to build a collaborative, participative, and human-centric technology are not realized.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. From a systemic point of view, from systems point of view, there's multiple agendas, there's multiple levels and cycles going on all the time. And so I do recall for some of the parts of the chapters, people reflecting on the fact that if AI or technology has, the algorithms are actually having some pretty big impacts. We've seen many different types of impacts of this. And it's to the point where algorithms are this reacting to other algorithms. And so we don't actually get as human-centric or as humans to participate in what's going on. So it's terribly sort of non-human-centric. It gets taken out of our position to be able to react and respond to that, and get the systemic point could be no longer something that humans can actually impact and be a part of, because it's all dealt with systems based on algorithms, and this is something that people are fearful of and losing control of that. So this is just something that I'd like to sort of also say in terms of what we think might be a threat, in terms of job loss also, and how you're portrayed within your systems. Yeah.
Thank you, Susu. David?
I'd like to cite Amos Tversky, who was the partner of Daniel Kahneman, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, a psychologist. And what Amos Tversky said was, when he was asked, "Are you worried about artificial intelligence?" And he says, "No, I'm worried about human stupidity." And so I'm actually encouraged by Industry 5.0. In the COP talks, and I'm Canadian, there has been talk that sounds an awful lot like Industry 5.0 in Canada. And this is still policy to come, because with the COP meetings just completing now, we don't have all the policies in place, but there are shifts happening. So as someone who doesn't live in the EU, I have to actually applaud the EU for taking the initiative and showing leadership. Now, as research scientists, though, I know you rely on data, and so you have to actually track what has happened. And there's the challenge on this book, which is, what are we seeing? What are we looking forward? Are we getting distracted away from the big issues by generative AI?
Again, I would probably point to the fact that, yes, I think there has been some distraction, but there's also the way in which things are being processed. And so there are difficulties and issues. I'm still very positive about it as an individual, looking at the work and looking at what is being researched and what is coming out in terms of data and data collection. That's not always reflected, that positivity, but I think that there is quite a number of different levels at play, that if you view it from a systemic point of view, there will be some sort of emergent outcomes, and there'll be not one, there'll be multiple. Because as many of you have said today, there are always different parallels running, and it's not just two, it could be several. Could be several different layers and agendas running simultaneously. It is early days, and I'm not sure what will emerge, but there is a huge amount of activity and application, and there is leadership, and it's going as fast as I think is possible. It's quite a big undertaking, but I still, having looked at all the data and looking at this, I still come back to the thing, what exactly is Industry 5.0? What are we actually looking at? What is it that's emerging? That question still remains, for me at least.
Marchesa, your concerns about technology.
As David said, technologies are okay, they're good. The stupidity is the issue. Yeah, the way technologies are governed and leveraged, they cause the issue. I would say that, I mean, if we look at the Industry 4.0 from the economic perspective, it has been a very good thing that has happened, all right? And there are a lot of practical evidence that Industry 4.0 and the rapid or aggressive implementation of those novel technologies, they have led to the improvement of various economic metrics, all right? So, I mean, it's very difficult to make a decision if Industry 4.0 has been good or bad, or generative AI is going to be good or bad. I mean, I guess we should consider who is asking this question.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I guess we should consider this from the perspective of various stakeholders. Maybe leading companies that they have been enjoying the monopoly in terms of technology and talents and so on and so forth. They're quite happy with that. And they're going to be quite happy with the next industrial revolution, I guess. But if we ask from people who don't have the best kind of education, or they are dealing with the minimum wages, then I guess they are quite pissed off because of, when it comes to Industry 4.0 or like other technologies. So that's my take.
Good, thank you. Let me follow that up. At the end of the first chapter, I proposed a thought that I'm not sure everyone would agree with here or elsewhere, that the issue really is not technology itself. The issue is not the essential technologies. The issue is how humans have used and will implement those technologies, meaning that it really is not out of human control. And to follow Marteza, your thought, it's not that everybody is equally in control, but it's also that not that there are no humans in control. And so I think it is a question of how do we understand, how do we put this in perspective? Do you believe that the technologies themselves truly could be completely out of control? Or is it really just a matter of finding the people who are actually pulling the levers?
If I can speak up for some of the authors who aren't here, there's an emphasis in the book about skills. Skills are actually something that we can do within education systems. Now, there are challenges when we're talking about whether people, so we're talking about Industry 5.0, whether people have gotten equitably to an Industry 4.0 level, which means everyone has access to the internet. Will there be access equitably to generative AI? That's an open question right now.
So let's take a turn and look purposefully through a positive lens. We've got the technologies. We've talked about a lot of the fears and real potential threats. But if you have real hope for what they could do, what do you see as being the potential for Industry 5.0 opening a door to a new way, a new path, a new avenue, new purposes for the technologies that exist now and are quickly evolving?
I would say that perhaps looking at some of the chapters, whilst there's negativity, but the positive side is that it could be quite freeing. It could allow people to be far more creative than they have. They might be able to move beyond repetition in the same way as we've previously adopted technology, and then it's released us to do other things and to get away from repetition. So again, it would mean that the possibility is there, at least through education and application and access, much like the internet. It's possible that, you know, a lot more people can have access to things that they just didn't have before. This is possible. Again, David's point about stupidity comes to mind, and how this is applied is also another big, huge question. But hypothetically, if you're talking about the positive aspects, that would be something that I'd probably like to mention. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can add also to that, because talking from a positive perspective, I would like to bring one of the studies of one colleague from the University of Lund, an economist who bring this method of backcasting in contradiction with the forecasting, because sometimes building a scenario of with the current system relationships and the current drivers is quite hard to get out of this existing relationships. So we have the tendency to build into some kind of optimization of the actors, of the drivers, of the resources, inputs and outputs we have. But when we talk about this backcasting idea, it's trying to visualize ourselves, the society, into a kind of ideal scenario where we have a fair and just society, and then trying to go back into building what kind of technology we will need and what kind of power relationship needs to be built in order to achieve this ideal scenario. So this is something that I think requires a lot of complexity, a lot of tools, and using technology like the generative AI and other kind of available technology that is now being created into purposes like this, it will be something positive for society in general.
Thank you.
So nobody else has got anything to say about positivity. That says a lot in itself, doesn't it?
Let's take a look at the AI war is happening already, like between US and China, like in other powers. So I'm a pessimist, yeah.
But that's good to have that as a counterbalance. That's good. Yeah. And I must say, go ahead, David.
I think there's an opportunity, and there are discussions today about generative AI and around open source. So the opportunity is there, and there's been a history, and I'd written a book on this actually, about IBM taking on open source and open innovation. And there's an opportunity to do that. But the open source also requires participation. It requires funding, and it requires education. So when we look back and again, trying to trace what's happened in the information era, when the personal computer came out and it was new, and the internet came out and it was new, and now smartphones came out and they were new, but now everyone has a smartphone. So everyone has a smartphone. So I guess the question would be, if everyone had a smartphone and learned to use it, as we seem to all have adapted these days, what does it mean for skills and the way that people learn? It's possible, and I don't want to attack all universities, although I may. The question as to whether universities can keep up with these changes, there are all other places to learn. So Khan Academy, people have moved online. And so I guess I'd ask others if people want to learn more about advanced Industry 4.0 and potentially what Industry 5.0 could be, where would they go? Who would they ask? Well, what should they be doing?
Yeah.
Interesting question.
So let me, I'm sorry, Susu, you want to respond to David?
Yeah, just quickly, I would just sort of say it's an open-ended question, but I think that's really in transition. There's already a lot of things moving out of universities, and hybrids between industry and other smaller research groups and those sorts of things are occurring already. But that may also be tied to funding, the way in which you can get access to it. But again, going back to it's like it's decentralizing. It's like a decentralization.
So let me offer a perspective about possibilities. One of the big discussions at the moment is about ethics, right? How will we bring ethics into the development or the regulations about, I mean, what's it going to take to create some agreeable ethical framework for these technologies as they're quickly evolving? What I propose is that just focus on social media as we know it. I think the social media platforms very closely represent the ethics of the designers and the people who have developed them, mostly the owners of them at this point. And I think there's absolutely no reason that that is inherently what they have to be. I think the technologies themselves are neutral enough that they could absolutely reflect the better human sides of ourselves. They could be fair and they could be just. They don't have to be destructive. They don't have to push kids into just continually staying on, flipping from one topic to the next in some kind of a frenzy. They could be educational. They could be productive. And there's nothing about the technology that stops us from doing that. And so my optimistic view says we still are in control and we could actually produce incredibly better versions of the kinds of technologies that exist now and are being developed.
That's nice. I'd like to hear what Morteza has to say in response to that, just as a kind of a winding up thing. Morteza?
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
I was kind of relying on your negativity to respond to that. I'm curious.
I'm quite addicted to new technologies and I'm not negative about them. I guess that's the problem, is the issue of governance and the lag that exists between, the commercialization of new technology and, social actors understanding that, oh God, it is causing a lot of social issues or a lot of imbalances, right? So there should be some mechanism to shorten this gap as much as possible. All right, that involves the development of a new technology. And there has been some ideas about how this can be done. And these ideas have been discussed under the umbrella of Industry 5.0, such as having a real-time measurement system or monitoring system that involves all the stakeholders so that they can monitor the development of a new technology all the way to implementation and extensive usage. But it hasn't materialized yet. It has been just a dream. And I guess as long as we cannot solve this issue, it's going to happen again.
Yep.
And
Okay.
I believe the modern technologies are a bit more disruptive as compared to the older versions. So it's going to just get worse and worse.
Wow. Okay. So that's really, there you go, Gary. There's your counterpoint.
I can also help Morteza here, I think, with the negativity part. No, I mean, when we're talking about ethics, I mean, I agree with everybody. I mean, technology, it's not negative on itself, but I'm thinking here also about this issue of resilience regarding society, because when we get over dependent on some kind of, I mean, in technology in general, and there's not this good security tools or mechanisms regarding social medias or fake news, but also as we just experienced now with those kind of cyber attacks when the entire system just falls down, then we also need to think about this issue of resilience. I mean, how resilient is the society to this kind of fake information or cyber attacks, or how aware is society of these potential threats? Are they aware that this could happen, or are they prepared also? I mean, those kind of mechanisms needs to be created, but also popularized or shared among the civil society.
That's a good point. Gary, we're coming up to time. I just thought I'd let you know.
Yep, I see that. And so I think we have basically arrived at the beginning of the next discussions that need to be starting now. This is what I hope the book will provide the foundation for, as we've discussed, to begin thinking about. So what does come next? And how do we think about it? How do we talk about it? How do we try to impact it?
Yes, I agree. So I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. Thank you, Gary, for running all those wonderful questions. And so the book will be coming out 2024 spring, and it's by Springer Nature Japan. And it's going to be part of the Systems Transitional Sciences series. and it will be open access. So thank you very much and goodbye.